Yes. Okay. Here we go again. All right. What? There's so, dude. Like this rabbit hole goes so deep. And what I want to get into, as you can see, I can't get off of this. I can't get off of this shadow kick, but there's a reason. There's a reason. Um, And this is why this gets even crazier when we're talking about this kind of just the unseen, the whole unseen part of this storyboard. So, all right, so let's do a quick recap. As I'm talking about my childhood kitten named Shadow, and my whole experience with this kitten when I was a child, and then how I had this cryptid type encounter directly related to my childhood experience with this kitten named Shadow, and then how fast forward from that event, which took place in, I'm going to say 1996 because of numbers and everything. So then fast forward from 1996 to 2022, which is another interesting number, and June 20th of 2022, okay, is when this shadow business all ties into the event, the entire event. Okay. And that a big part of this involving my childhood experience with this kitten I named Shadow all throughout these years up until now, the direct tie with this experience, my childhood kitten experience with the song 46 and 2, okay, which is crazy because now you're starting to see synchronicity in numbers. If you look back at, like, I don't know what the date was when I was a child. Well, if I was 5 years old, that would put the date at probably 1982. Or no, wait. Probably 1980. And then 1996 is when I had the encounter involving the song 46 and 2. And then when this whole encounter resurfaced and got intertwined with the June 20th, 2022 event of Todd Minshall's death. So you see all these numbers, patterns in numbers, okay? And this song, 46 and 2, and when you look into this song, it's all based in the shadow archetype. And when you start looking into the shadow archetype, there is a massive tie with that of the shadow archetype to the event. And because the shadow archetype, if you understand the psychology and Carl Jung's archetype, and you have an understanding of what the shadow archetype is, well, the shadow archetype is the main force behind people who are psychopaths. Like, the shadow archetype is the psychopath within you and me, because there is a psychopath within all of us. But see, with the psychopath, they have allowed the archetype of the shadow to be the main, the main archetype in their life. Like, whereas your archetype might be the warrior, your main archetype might be the warrior. Say you're fighting for custody for your child of something, you have a warrior archetype, or like somebody who's a nomad, they might have a wanderer archetype. There's all different kinds of archetypes. The shadow archetype is the one that you don't want driving the bus. You never want the shadow archetype driving the bus. Now, the whole song 46 and 2 is based on the shadow archetype. It's actually based on integrating the shadow archetype. And so this is where this gets even more interesting, because so when I'm talking about my Psycho X and demon possession and witches, all them witches and shit, witches are driven by their shadow archetype. That is a shadow archetype. That is, a witch is the encompassing fucking like shadow archetype. So these are people that are people who willingly join the Illuminati, knowing that the Illuminati is evil, and they willingly join. That's their shadow archetype is the one that's driving the bus. Do you not understand? Like, people that get involved in Todd Mahdi fucking death cults and shit, they're allowing their shadow archetype to be the decision maker. They're allowing their shadow archetype to dominate them. Now, we all have a shadow archetype, but people that aren't part of the Illuminati and are typically against principles like that are against the principles of things like the Illuminati and Luciferianism and fucking Freemasonry. See, there are people that their principles stand against Freemasonry. And people who stand against the principles of Freemasonry are not driven by their shadow archetype. They have not allowed their shadow archetype to take control and become the decision maker. Whereas someone like my ex and these other witches that she's involved with, they have all willingly allowed their shadow archetype to be in control. They basically, a shadow archetype is a demon. Okay? Now, integrating the shadow archetype is healthy. The most ideal way to manage and you know, act accordingly and respond accordingly to your own shadow archetype is to integrate your shadow archetype, which first means to acknowledge that you have the shadow archetype. Now, many people, they suppress their shadow archetype. They don't want to acknowledge that their shadow archetype exists within them. The more a person suppresses their shadow archetype, the more likely that their shadow archetype will take them over, which is why it is important to integrate the shadow archetype and to acknowledge that shadow archetype exists within all of us. We all have that within us. And the more a person acknowledges that this shadow exists within the self, the more they can manage it and make correct decisions. Because having a shadow archetype within a person can be advantageous if it's integrated. If the shadow archetype is integrated and never allowed to take control of a person. See, that's how a person prevents their shadow from taking them over, is by integrating the shadow into their other archetypes. And always keeping another archetype as the dominant archetype. But to suppress the shadow archetype is the opposite of integration. That means that the person is pretending that their shadow archetype does not exist within them. And that is where the danger is. When a person suppresses the shadow archetype, that only grows the shadow archetype and to the point where the shadow archetype can take over. Like when you talk about people going postal, that is when they've given up, they've been suppressing their shadow archetype, and then some event happens, they snap, and they allow and then their shadow archetype takes control. As soon as their shadow archetype takes control, that person goes postal, and next thing you know, they're out killing innocent people, and like they've just snapped. They've just gone completely batshit. So, and a person like my ex-girlfriend, okay, and how I reference her as demon possessed with the evil eye and all this stuff, that is a person who has allowed their shadow archetype to take over, to take control. And how they've allowed their shadow archetype to take control is by neglecting to integrate their shadow archetype into their self. They've suppressed their shadow archetype, pretended it wasn't there, and the more it suppressed it, the more it grew. And then some event happened that made them snap. And as soon as that event happens, it unleashes the shadow, and the shadow takes control like a demon possession. Okay? And so, and then so this is all like very interesting shit, and it really directly ties into my story, okay? Because look, okay, so you probably understand somewhat about narcissism, which is a similar thing involving the shadow archetype taking control and allowing the shadow archetype to take control by pretending, not living in, delusion is what causes the shadow archetype to take control. Delusion. And then delusion mixed with some circumstance. Some circumstance, usually traumatic circumstance, will unleash the hidden shadow archetype within a person, and then that shadow archetype will take control. And so anyway, now if you are someone who has somewhat have a healthy management of your shadow, and you have something happen to you like what happened to me, where you encounter a psychopath, a real psychopath, okay, and they're in their close proximity to you. If you encounter that, that is like a physical manifestation of your shadow archetype. And so it becomes, this is literal, bro. This is literal. A psychopath, being confronted with a psychopath and being aware that you are dealing with a psychopath is like a living manifestation of your own shadow. So when you're looking at it, it is a mirror of a part of you when you're looking at it, okay? When you're looking at this demon-possessed person, when you're looking at this person who has allowed the shadow archetype to take complete control of them, that is a version of you that you are looking at. They are a diluted version of yourself. And you have the potential to become that person, okay? Now, that person who is controlled by their shadow archetype understands this on some level. That's why psychopaths and narcissists project onto you. Like they'll there's a method that they've created an acronym for in psychology, where the psychopathic narcissist has this pattern where they'll do all this shit to you, and while they're doing it to you, they'll project that you're doing that very thing unto them. This is like shadow 101. This is what your shadow archetype is all about. And so when a person is integrating their shadow archetype, that means they're confronting their own shadow. They're looking within themselves, and they're not ignoring the existence of the shadow within them. They're acknowledging it and saying, okay, here, do you understand? And so that is a part of the process of a person integrating their shadow, their own shadow. And so there's different levels of confronting one's own shadow. And but the crazy thing about like the event that I'm storyboarding that is a real phenomenon, not just me. It's not unique to me at all. Is that like when encountering a psychopath, like with me, I was living with this person was such a psycho that they could mask all of this for 3 years while we're sleeping in the same bed together. They make movies about this shit. They write songs about this shit. This is not unique to me. And, if psychopaths were so easy to discern and detect, we wouldn't have serial killers getting away with murder. And guaranteed, there are plenty of psychopaths in the world that are to this day getting away with murder. So they're not getting detected, and there's a reason they're not. And that reason is because the psychopath is the equivalent of a reptilian. Like, they can mask themselves as a human being. No problem. And the longer they do it, the better they are at it. So, if an individual is ever in a situation where they're married to someone for 3 years, and then after 3 years they find out that that person is a psychopath, that is a physical manifestation of one's own shadow, looking at them, and that is a very shocking experience, because it's one thing for a person to go within themselves and discover the shadow within themselves, but when to actually be confronted with the physical manifestation of one's own shadow is a whole other level. And one of the most bizarre things about the psychopath is their knowledge on some level of this, whether it's subconscious or even bleeding into the conscious itself. They know that you know. They know that you know that they know. And it's like a mirror. A mirror is put up, and they are very good at confusing and blurring the lines and confusing you and me as to like who is who. I mean, there's a really good X-Files episode that encompasses illustrates this very well, where fucking not Fox Mulder, what's the pretty gal's name? What's her name? Fox Mulder and Agent Mulder and Agent whatever. The pretty woman, where there's a clone of her that looks exactly like her, and it's a reptilian. It's a shape-shifting reptilian that has shape-shifted itself to look just like Agent Scully. And you've got all these other agents around, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, and there's all this confusion, and then the reptilian shapeshifts into Agent Scully and looks exactly like Agent Scully, wearing the same clothes and everything. And then Agent Scully shows up, and then she realizes that this reptilian has shapeshifted into looking exactly like her, and she's trying to tell the agents, and then they're all looking around there, and then they discover they don't know which one's Scully. And then they're confronted where there's two versions of Scully, and they're both trying to tell the other agents, I'm Scully, that's the reptilian. And the other one's saying, no, I'm Scully, that's the reptilian. And the agents all have their guns drawn, and they don't know who's who. This is how deep the shadow gets, the shadow archetype. And the shadow is the psychopathic narcissist is the physical manifestation of the shadow, because psychopathic narcissists and narcissistic psychopaths have allowed or otherwise given control of themselves and their life over to their shadow archetype, hence demon possession. Okay, and so like a buddy of mine talked about how when you look at the characteristics of a demon-possessed person, and then you look at the characteristics of someone suffering like a chronic schizophrenic condition or a chronic psychopathic condition or whatever, they mirror each other. A demon-possessed person, the symptoms and signs of a demon-possessed person are identical to the signs of, I would say, more accurately than any other, a psychopath or a narcissistic psychopath or a psychopathic narcissist. But I'm sure schizophrenia and all this stuff. But anyways, yeah, so you're dealing with a mirror. And the mirror phenomena was like, when I'm talking about the event and even the pre-event and definitely the post-event, like there was a mirror thing going on. And what's crazy is that's what triggered my ex-girlfriend to snap, is because as much as she was a mirror of me, which I understood because I have a certain level of understanding with in regards to psychology and shadow work. Shadow work is a new age term for the Carl Jung practice of identifying and discerning internal archetypes. Okay, shadow work is kind of I don't like it because it's so new agey, but I have a lot of experience in facing my shadow, acknowledging my shadow, and integrating my shadow into my life. I've got a lot of experience in that, so I understand that I am a mirror to her, and or that she is a mirror to me, and vice versa. And I understand this, whereas she never had that understanding, and so. But us living together for 3 years, I was a mirror, and every time, like she, and people like that, if people that suppress their shadow archetype, they're looking away from their own self. Do you understand? Like they refuse to look at themselves. This is why integrating the shadow is so important, because it's a part of us that we must acknowledge, and a person that refuses to look at themselves is in trouble. And so me acting as a mirror to her during the 3 years that we lived together and she wasn't even aware that I was a mirror. But she, on subconscious level, she was. And after a while, like, she couldn't handle having to look at her shadow every time she looked at me. And so her only mechanism of addressing her shadow, which she didn't even know she had a shadow and didn't believe she had one, and all this other stuff, was suppressing her shadow. So when she would look at me, she would see a reflection of her shadow archetype, and then she would have to suppress even more and more. And so then we're living together, and so it's compounding her shadow archetype more and more. And after 3 years, it's like a ticking bomb. It is like a bomb. And I didn't know this about her. I didn't know. Only she would know, And so that explains like the proverbial bomb. I mean, literal fire though. I'm talking literal fire, literal death, literal all this stuff. And this is a product of the shadow archetype. This is the product of someone who refuses to acknowledge, let alone integrate their shadow archetype within themselves and who they are. Because again, the shadow archetype can be advantageous if a person acknowledges their shadow and integrates it within themselves as a part of who they are. And so it's very, very interesting how this song 46:2 ties into all this, and how my whole experience with this psychopath, which was my first close encounter with a psychopath, okay, where I was sleeping with her, she exposed herself, and all this. It was my first experience with a close encounter experience with a fucking full-blown psychopath. And how a psychopath, man, is so good at mirroring their own behavior back on you. Because if you know and acknowledge and have integrated your shadow, then that's even more of a mirror, and they can more easily project onto you what they're doing, and it blurs, all the lines are totally blurred. And so it's pretty scary. And actually, because I've done a lot of internal, shadow integration, but I've never seen a full-blown manifestation of my shadow archetype. I mean, you'll see glimpses of, we all see glimpses of our own shadow archetype in other people, and that's mirrored, and that's fine. That's a part of everyday life. But when an exposed psychopath exposes themselves, dude, it is a full-on fucking living, breathing, like tangible manifestation of your shadow archetype. And so it's a really wonderful thing in a sense, because the process of integrating one's shadow never ends. And the work in integrating one's shadow is by confronting it. And if a person can actually confront a physical manifestation of their own shadow, that means that they're over the target. That means that there is, and I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, because I need to inject this, that whatever good qualities and traits I might have or experience or display is not me, dude. It is whatever you want to call it, God or whatever it is. It's that is working through me or something. It's not me. It's not me. Nonetheless, it is an amazing experience to encounter and confront a physical manifestation of the shadow archetype. And that's what an exposed psychopath is a full-blown physical manifestation of the shadow archetype. And so it's just a signal of growth, and especially if a person can survive it and get through it, and no one survives it alone. Self-sufficiency will not overcome the self-sufficiency will not overcome the shadow, will not integrate. Self-sufficiency is not enough to integrate one's shadow. Self-sufficiency is insufficient. It requires much more than self-sufficiency. Okay. And luckily, I've serendipitously been able to learn a lot of stuff about the shadow archetype within myself and integrating the shadow within myself, because so that it prepared me. I didn't know what it was preparing me for, and I never anticipate I would never even imagine encountering a physical manifestation of my shadow archetype. And I'm telling you, it is fucking confusing as fuck. Like, you don't know who's who. You don't know who is who. It is a massive mind fuck. Okay. Demons, think about demons and like Malachi exercising demons, where Malachi talks about the danger of exercising demons. Demons have this mirroring effect, and the mirror is a powerful force and component on both sides of the spectrum. And a mirror, and I'll tell you, the shadow archetype, especially in its physical manifestation, can use the mirror to take down an exorcist. That's exactly what they do. Look at the movie The Exorcist. the demons within the girl start talking to the priests and bringing up personal details of the priest's own personal life. Like it's a mirror. It's a fucking mirror. Look at the movie Constantine with Keanu Reeves. In the first 10 minutes of the movie Constantine, the very first demon possession that Constantine exorcises, look at how Constantine exorcises that demon. Do you know what he does to exorcise that demon? He uses a mirror. He pulls a mirror off the wall, puts it in front of the demon possessed person, and the demon looking at its own self is what drives it out of the person and locks itself into the mirror. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that you should go exorcise demons. Listen to Malachi. If you want to understand the danger and what you're getting into when exorcising demons, listen to the Malachi interview, the Art Bell interview with Malachi, the exorcist Malachi. I'm not encouraging anyone to exorcise demons. I'm just talking about the mirror effect, how powerful the mirror is on both sides of the spectrum. See, me being a mirror to my psycho ex is what caused her to snap. It caused her to suppress her own reflection to the point where after 3 years, it just snapped and blew up. Fire, fucking murder, fire, death. Demons, fucking, the evil eye, Todd Mahdi, the death cult, which is like, and so the shadow. And so that's what I mean. Like, you see what I'm saying when I'm talking about the shadow as it relates to my psycho ex and her, the demon possession of her and her flipping out and all of her actions being demonic driven or shadow. A shadow archetype is the psychological reference of demon possession. Going back to like my friend telling me about how when you look at the signs of a demon possessed person, they exactly mirror the symptoms and signs of psychopathy and shit. And there's a reason for that. And psychopathy is based in the shadow fucking archetype. Shadow archetypes is all psychology. It's Jungian psychology. And how the shadow relates to this whole storyboard is like completely bizarre. And the level of fucking just pure unbelievable experience in encountering a physical manifestation of my own shadow in the form of my psycho ex-girlfriend being demon possessed and shit was, dude, you want to talk about the veil being lifted between like reality and what the fuck, like the unseen, like wow. And it just, the wake of that reverberated for months and months, and a year goes by and I'm still like confused and fucking, I mean, these fucking psychopaths, these demons, whatever, you do not understand. Like, and so that's why this song 46 and 2 by Tool, and it's the lyrics of this song are all about the shadow archetype. If you look into this, you'll see the psychologists are doing articles about it. All kinds of people are explaining how this song 46 and 2 is in direct reference to the shadow archetype. And then you start looking into what the shadow archetype is and how it relates to demon possession and on and all this. And that this song traces back to my childhood with that kitten I named Shadow, and that this song and my kitten Shadow and this crystal all get tied into the quartzite event. Quartzite. That crystal is a quartz crystal. It's a smoky quartz crystal. And how it all ties into the Todd Mahdi of Todd Minshaw and all them witches, and like you see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Like, this is madness, and so the storyboard is going to be continue to just go off the fucking charts. Like, this shit is that's why it is so hard to explain every facet of all this different angles of what in the fuck this is all about. It is purely like playing with madness on this one, and not by intention. I never wanted any of this. I never or anticipated it. And in fact, I anticipated the opposite because of all the shadow integration that I have done throughout my last 23 years of my life. I would think that all of this is behind me. Like, the last thing I would expect is to be confronted with a physical manifestation of my own shadow. But when the more you start looking into shadow integration, the more advanced a person gets at shadow integration, the more difficult the challenges become. It starts to become more of that, where you think that you've done the work and you're at a plateau, and then there's more work, like the work never ends. And this is the work. This is where you can fight back against the beast system. Know thyself. Know thy enemy. The shadow archetype, the physical manifestation of the shadow archetype is the enemy, okay? Knowing that you have the shadow archetype within you is half the battle. Then integrating the shadow within you so that it doesn't take you over, is where the fight is. That's where the battle is. And that's what the whole know thy enemy, know thyself. The mirror, dude. Know thy enemy, know thyself. And all this weird woo-woo shit, I'm talking about mirrors and how a psychopath is a reflection of one's own shadow archetype. It is a fucking physical manifestation of one's own shadow archetype. Therefore, it's a mirror. Mirrors, man. Mirrors. And like, that scene in Constantine is there for a reason. That's how Constantine exorcises the first demon in the movie Constantine, is using a mirror. Mirrors. And also when talking about the shadow archetype requires a mirror. It requires one to look at oneself, a mirror, and find the shadow within oneself and acknowledge it, because it's ignoring one's shadow is what strengthens and emboldens one's own shadow to potentially take that person over. So acknowledging the enemy within oneself, and then integrating it and shit. That's what's going on. And that's what the shadow kind of thing is all about in the realm of psychology. Now, psychology isn't a perfect science, and of course then, and so it can get, but there is a lot of truth to it, so it's just crazy how this shit all works. Fucking crazy.